Dealing with negative space can definitely be tricky, and there's some letters that create a lot more negative space, like the letter T, for example. And then it gets even harder to deal with when you have two of those letters next to each other, like these two T's here. They just create these giant areas of emptiness in between the letters, making it difficult to fill that space. There are some things you can do to fill the space, like 3D, but it can get tricky, especially if the letters before or after have zero negative space around them. So then it looks like there's this giant area of negative space surrounded by these really tight letters, and it can just look really wonky on the scale of like a full word. Luckily, there's a few different ways that we can get rid of that negative space, which I'll demonstrate for you. The first way is shortening the limbs. You can see the tops of those first two T's that I did, they're pretty wide, which creates even more negative space. But on this one that I'm showing right here, we can make the top fairly narrow and the body take up the majority of the top, which gets rid of some of that negative space. The other thing we can do, like I'm demonstrating here, is bend the body of the letter. And we can bend it in the direction of the next letter, so it cuts into what would be negative space and just fills up that negative space that would be between like that T and whatever the next letter is. In this case, we're going to use another T. So following that same two steps, we can make the top more narrow, bend the body on the second T. And then the third thing we can do is kind of reverse overlap our letters, or kind of like interlock them. As I'm demonstrating here, the top of the second T overlaps the first T, and then I have the body of that first T kind of bend and overlap the second, which allows us to bring them right next to each other, and there's zero negative space there now. So once again, here's the three things we can do. Bend the body of the letters. Second, we can shorten the limbs. And third, we can interlock or overlap our letters. And not everyone likes the look of this. I personally love it. Helps me out a lot. So let's go over how to do it on the scale of a full piece. So we're going to do a follower request here. Z-I-G-Y, Ziggy, which is a great word to use for this example because there's some letters that have a lot of negative space around them, the I and the Y. So first of all, I'm going to just sketch out the Z here. And we're really not doing much to the Z initially. But next up is the I, and I want to use an I like this with a top and a bottom bar and a body. And typically, an I such as this would take up a lot of space. You can see here, if I just draw it out normally, there's a ton of negative space in between that Z and the I. But luckily, we're going to get rid of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of bend or angle the top of the I. So I'm planning to have it overlap the Z, and then I'm also going to angle it down the other way, and then I'm going to bend the body as well, which allows me to bring that left side of the I so much closer to the Z. And then I'm also making some other minor adjustments, like I'm making that Z a little bit thicker to fill more of that space, and then I'm interlocking the letters. You see the top of the I overlaps the Z, and then the bottom of the Z goes into the I. So you're still able to differentiate the letters, see which letters they are, but I'm able to bring them much closer together. Now, the next letter is a G, and the G doesn't really create much negative space around it, but there is all that negative space around the I, on the right side of the I. So once again, I'm going to kind of interlock the letters. That top part of the G, I'm going to have that cover that right part of the I, and then the bottom of the I is going to cover the G, which allows me to bring that G just right up in there. And then our next and final letter here is a Y, which also creates a lot of negative space around it. But I'm going to use the trick of interlocking and overlapping the letters to get rid of that negative space. There would be all that negative space on the left side of the Y, but I'm going to have the top of the Y overlap the G so that we can still see that it's a Y. And then I'm going to have the bottom of the G overlap the Y so that we can still see clearly that it is a G. Now, this is just a stylistic preference. You can have negative space. There's nothing really wrong with having negative space. Tons of great writers who have negative space in their pieces. But personally, I'm just not a huge fan of it. I don't like the way that it looks when one half of the piece has a lot more negative space than the other, or when one letter really stands out because there's just so much negative space around it. And so in those types of scenarios, like with this name Ziggy, this is what I like to do. I like to interlock the letters, reverse overlap them, and bring them right up against each other. Give this a try in your next piece. If you picked some name with a ton of negative space, like G-A-T-T or something, or G-Y-A-T-T, whatever the case is, give this a try, see how you like it. Or even if you don't want to interlock the letters like I do, you can still use the tricks of shortening the limbs and bending the bodies of the letters.